some of you may remember our original Disney Villains Weak to Powerful video from a couple years ago. But in addition to adding some of Disney's newer villains, or villains we forgot last time, we also wanted to acknowledge where we might have either underestimated or overshadowed certain villains that we did have on our list before. And with the new Disney film that just came out, this seemed like a great time to do so. So without further ado, I'm Keefe Nossi with Wicked Binge, and this is Disney Villains Weak to Powerful. Now just like last time, no Pixar villains, no direct-to-DVD sequel original villains, and no villains from the Disney Channel. Theatrical villains only. With that said, it's time to kick things off with our weakest villain before working our way up. At our very bottom, we have the Aristocats' bumbling butler, Edgar. From his status as a humble servant to rich millionairess Madame Bonfamille, to his age and lack of any real strength, we felt that this time around he really did deserve to be ranked as the weakest villain. Now, that's not to say that Edgar is without his own strengths, as he was at the very least clever enough to successfully get rid of the Duchess and her kittens, at least for a short while. Then again, it really doesn't take a genius to trick some cats with a tasty treat before sneaking out in the middle of the night. You could also argue that the fact that he was willing to go through with his plan at all was pretty stupid. All that hard work when he could have just dealt with being a servant to Bonfamille's cats.
They'll be gone. Now think of a way.
After all, it's not as though the cats would really be able to do anything to stand up to him if he just decided to do the bare minimum of taking care of them before then spending the rest of the fortune on himself. Edgar is also extremely clumsy, seen stumbling over things like trash cans and barely being able to keep control of his motorcycle. Although he's able to stand his ground with them, he still just barely manages to not be completely overshadowed by the alley cats. It ultimately takes him getting hit over the head to be defeated, and while this is a reasonable weakness to have, we feel like a stronger person or even just a more capable fighter would have been able to fight off or trap all the cats before they knocked him out. Going from one of our oldest villains to one of our youngest, next is Foxy Loxy from Chicken Little. Apologies for not including her last time, though in retrospect, we really weren't missing much. Foxy Loxy is your typical schoolyard bully. Because she's so athletic and bombastic, it's fairly easy for her to get her classmates and even the rest of the town to her side when she proves to be a sports star. Her sports of choice seem to be dodgeball and baseball, and she proves to be very good at both of them. She's also got a lackey, Goosey Lucy, by her side, but while Foxy could easily outmatch someone as tiny and weak as Chicken Little, what brings Foxy down this low is her inability to fight off anything outside of the baseball field. She's just a kid after all, so when she tries to fight off one of the aliens armed with a rock, well, let's just say that it doesn't go well. We won't hold accidentally getting her personality altered against her, but all in all, Foxy really is a minor antagonist threat in the grand scheme of the film. Really, it's no wonder that she's easy to forget. But while some may see her as a ripoff of a certain Dalmatian coat lover, Madame Medusa from The Rescuers manages to be just a bit more memorable. You know, they say diamonds are a girl's best friend, but Medusa manages to take that to the extreme, being absolutely obsessed with the things and making it her goal to get the devil's eye by any means necessary. Although a bit bumbling with quite a notable temper, Medusa was ultimately cunning and patient enough to successfully kidnap an orphan girl to use in her schemes. She knows how to be manipulative through fake kindness and shame, and overall knows how to use people well, though her willingness to just toss her allies aside after they've served their use could be seen as foolish. When pushed to her limits, Medusa's shown to be truly ruthless, though it's hard to say just how competent she is with a gun, as she seemed to be a fairly poor shot when she tried shooting at Penny. Still, adding a bit of extra power to her arsenal is her access to her sidekick, Mr. Snoops' pet crocodiles, as they're extremely loyal to her and only her. Although the end of the film shows that even they have their limits, so again, we must point to Medusa's biggest weakness, that being her own lack of loyalty and her willingness to toss everyone else aside for the sake of her own greed. Hard to really build up power when you can't be bothered to put in the effort. And hey, sometimes you just can't beat the original, and Cruella de Vil can be quite the force to be reckoned with when she wants to be. One of the most notable things about Cruella, outside of that catchy as hell song that is that for the most part, Cruella tends to act purely on impulse. Oh sure, she took her time with that whole puppy kidnapping scheme, but when things start to go wrong, Cruella's prone to extremely reckless behavior, like tearing through the snowy landscape in her car, which ultimately led her to crash, leading to her defeat. Still, despite the fact that a simple car crash was enough to do Cruella in,
Shut up.
we have to still give her some respect. Cruella is extremely wealthy, being a rich heiress who's able to spend all the money she wants on herself and her greatest desires. She also has a couple of henchmen, Horace and Jasper, who are still able to be decent threats even if they mostly come off as incompetent. Beyond that, Cruella's greatest asset just may be her own level of intimidation, being a true devil woman and being able to threaten those who are afraid of her into obeying her. But of course, not everyone is afraid of Cruella, and without any physical power to speak of, save for her previously mentioned henchmen of course, as well as her own tendency to throw things when she gets angry, this is where Cruella tends to fall a bit short. Keeping with the evil ladies of Disney, next is Cinderella's Lady Tremaine. Cold-hearted and incredibly cruel, Tremaine falls into the same category as Cruella, where even if she's not much to worry about physically, she still manages to be incredibly intimidating, and it really is frightening seeing her methodically break down Cinderella's spirit with expert-level precision and nearly succeeding in her efforts. Though she never physically strikes Cinderella, Tremaine is also crafty, going so far as to do things like trapping Cinderella in her room and tripping the Grand Duke in order to break the glass slipper. If not for the help of the mice and a bit of extra luck, Tremaine might have gotten away with her cruel crimes. We further see Tremaine's craftiness in the third Cinderella movie, where she's easily able to stay ahead of Cinderella at almost all times, showing once again how she's able to think on her feet and do what she needs to do in order to keep her stepdaughter from her happily ever after.
Stay away from the prince.
Unfortunately for her, this is where our praise of Tremaine ends, as while she's received quite a power boost from getting the magic wand in that third film, it's only temporary. Once she's disarmed, Tremaine is defeated rather quickly. Furthermore, for as intimidating and spirit-breaking as Tremaine can be, both Cinderella and Anastasia are able to escape her in the end, and she isn't able to do a thing about it, so we're unable to place her any higher. Though not nearly as intimidating as a stepmother's evil glare will admit, Frozen's Duke of Weselton does manage to have some notable power. He is a duke, after all, which does grant him some authority that he uses after Elsa runs away. He's also regularly accompanied by 2 bodyguards who are both decently strong in their own right. However, while the Duke has the highest status that we've seen so far in this list due to his title, it ultimately doesn't amount to much. Neither Elsa nor Anna seem to have much respect for him, nor are they too intimidated by him. By the end of the movie, it's declared that Arendelle will no longer trade with Weselton, likely hindering the Duke's kingdom and causing it to lose some of its own strength. The Duke also proves himself to be arrogant, incredibly paranoid, quick to turn on allies, and even quicker when it comes to trying to exploit them, so
The Queen has cursed this land! She must be stopped!
we can't imagine that he, nor Weselton in general, had many allies to begin with. But as crafty as Disney villains can be, sometimes a bit of raw strength can really even the playing field, as seen with our next entry, Pete. Yeah, we might have underestimated Pete a bit, as while he can be seen as a bit of a loser in some instances, he can be a true threat in just as many others. The fact that he can go from being an annoying neighbor in one instance and a true powerhouse in another also shows the versatility of this character. He's been a common thug, a landlord, a musketeer's captain, a businessman, a tyrant, Maleficent's right-hand man, and more. What truly helped Pete stand out as a threat are his sheer size and strength, able to easily tower over as well as overpower characters like Mickey and Goofy. He's even been shown using weapons like swords and guns. You also have to acknowledge just how often Pete has been in a position of financial power over others, occasionally being seen as richer than the other characters. Still, we'll acknowledge that the guy isn't the brightest, and even with all that fat and muscle, it typically doesn't take too much to send him toppling down once the good guys manage to outwit and overpower him. The same could also be said for Peter Pan's Captain Hook, who, unfortunately for him, seems to alternate between being a joke and being an actual threat. For what it's worth, having his own little pirate army does put him a full cut above most of our previously ranked solo villains. Save for his first mate Smee, the rest of his pirates are all fairly competent, at least to the point of being able to successfully overwhelm and capture the Lost Boys and the Darling Children. As for his own personal strengths, although Hook is easily frustrated, he does have his moments where he can be sneaky and almost gentlemanly, which is what helps him briefly trick Tinkerbell into telling him where Peter's hideout was, as well as manipulate Wendy's daughter Jane in the Return to Neverland sequel. You also can't deny that the guy's a decent enough fighter, having the strength to throw a fellow pirate overboard single-handedly, or pry open a crocodile's jaws, and he's also pretty good with a sword, all things considered. It's said that Peter Pan is truly the only other person who's skilled enough to successfully fight him one-on-one. He can also be just as ruthless as any other villain, whether that's towards his enemies or his own men. Still, it is this temper of his that may be Hook's biggest weakness, that and a fear of ticking crocodiles. Because he's so determined and revenge-bound, when things start to go wrong, it can be very easy to get him flustered, leading to him making some foolish decisions. Even so, Hook's ability to be both suave and truly menacing, at least some of the time, is what puts him this high up in our ranking. In all honesty, respect and charm can get you pretty far in the best of circumstances. And Prince Hans proves that in spades. As a young prince with 12 brothers, Hans knew from a young age that he likely wouldn't get any power simply handed to him, meaning that he would have to seek it out himself. Say what you will about how convoluted his whole twist villain thing is, and you'd probably be right.
If only there was someone out there who loved you.
but Hans is implied to be fairly intelligent and very manipulative, being a fantastic liar who's able to keep calm under pressure. Through simply being charming and being able to act like the perfect prince, both Anna and the Kingdom of Arendelle as a whole are able to trust Hans almost immediately. I mean, the guy tells the others that Anna is dead, and they just take his word for it and don't even bother to check. Though, maybe that says more about them than Hans. Anyway, we see him try to further manipulate Elsa, eventually prompting her to give up all hope and nearly killing her with a sword afterwards. This is the most we see from Hans in terms of physical skill, although during an early battle with Elsa, we did also see how strategic he could be with a crossbow. But as successful as Hans is, he can still be just as arrogant as his fellow Disney villains, eventually dooming himself the moment he decided to brag about his grand master plan to Anna. He also can't take a punch, but considering how unnaturally strong Anna seems to be, we won't dock too many points away from him for that. But hey, who needs a prince when you can be king of games? Next up, we have Oogie Boogie. Simply put, Oogie Boogie isn't just hungry for bugs, but power as well. Hence why he's constantly trying to grab more of it through sneaky means as well as through gambling. Although, with the latter, he doesn't seem to be very good at it, usually needing to cheat just to get a win. To his credit, he's strong enough to overpower Sandy Claus long enough to tie him to his roulette wheel, only having the opportunity to do so thanks to his 3 henchmen, Lock, Shock, and Barrel. He also has a small array of death machines, most notable being his gun-wielding slot machines. For as goofy and campy as Oogie Boogie can be, he really isn't one to mess with. But for as much as Oogie may get a thrill out of scaring and hurting others, he himself almost comes off as a bit of a wimp at times, given his tendency to just hide away in his lair while his henchmen do all the work, as well as just how easily he's frightened by people like Jack Skellington. You also can't forget about his biggest weakness, that being the fact that he's just a bunch of bugs clumped together in a sack body. As shown in the film itself, one loose thread and it's all over. Though maybe not as intimidating, Zootopia's Bellweather proved to be about as crafty as our previous entries. Much like Hans, Bellweather uses her approachable appearance and seemingly meek personality to keep others unaware, allowing her to secretly pull the strings. Being the assistant mayor, she has access to a ton of information regarding the city of Zootopia. She's also skilled at leaving clues, using Nick and Judy's investigation to her advantage as a means to frame Mayor Lionheart. We also can't forget about Bellweather's team of rams. Breaking Bad references aside,
Alright, Walter and Jesse are back, so I'm leaving now.
these guys are both smart and hardy, being skilled chemists and marksmen while also being strong enough to shake off a fight on an abandoned subway. Along with being manipulative, we have to give Bellweather some extra points in that, in spite of pulling a water noose and bragging about evil plans to someone with a recorder, she did actually try to shoot the heroes herself with what she thought was concentrated night howlers. You gotta respect a villain who's actually smart enough to try and kill the heroes when they can, instead of coming up with some convoluted death trap. All in all, Bellweather proved to be a very manipulative, cruel, and dangerous villain. While we aren't sure how her plan would have worked out long term, it was certainly successful for a time, which in itself is pretty notable. Moving on to another selfish leader, Governor Radcliffe certainly has the firepower to back his prejudice and greed-filled goals. Being a governor, Radcliffe's position of power allows him to get away with pretty much whatever he wants, and all in the pursuit of fame and, above all else, gold! Although it could be argued that he isn't as brilliant as Bellweather, hell, if anything, he's kind of stupid given his stubbornness surrounding gold, he knows how to use tension, paranoia, and racist rhetoric to his advantage. While his own men don't necessarily like him, with only his manservant Wiggins having any real loyalty to him, Radcliffe's air of authority and confidence push his men to continue following him despite their doubts. Along with having a whole army of settlers by his side, Radcliffe does have the means to fight on his own if he absolutely needs to, having a shiny set of armor as well as the skills needed to effectively use a musket. But while he does a good job of manipulating current situations, like the tensions between the settlers and the Native Americans, in his favor, Radcliffe really doesn't plan too far ahead for the most part. This, in combination with his poor treatment of his men, leads to him coming off as incredibly foolish. He may be a strong leader on the surface, but it's still Thomas and the other settlers who remove him from power in the end. But while Radcliffe was just your standard greedy villain, Bill Sykes uses his greed as an excuse to be truly horrible. Though, given his role as a loan shark and the implications that he may just be a full-on crime boss, you really shouldn't be expecting anything different. True to his intimidating and shady demeanor, Sykes isn't all that afraid of getting his hands dirty, being more than willing to kill those who don't give him what he's owed. At one point, he's even heard on the phone talking with an underling about how they're going to torture some poor unknown victim.
What's the last thing you do? You put on the cement shoes?
Through his business, Sykes has both a ton of connections as well as access to quite a bit of information, such as the Foxworth Estate's phone number, allowing him to more easily demand ransom from the wealthiest members of the city. As an added show of force, Sykes also has 2 guard dogs, Dobermans, Roscoe, and DeSoto. He's also constantly armed with a handgun, which we see him nearly use when some of the dogs disguise themselves as a pizza delivery guy. You also can't ignore Sykes' durability, given that he was able to easily shake off punching through a car window. Through all of this, in spite of just being an ordinary guy, Sykes manages to still come off as an almost unstoppable force, to the point where it takes getting hit by a subway train to get him off Oliver and Company's tails once and for all. Keeping with the wealth-obsessed villains, it's time to take a look at Prince John. Let's be honest here, the thing that puts John this high up really is his status as a prince. Being a royal, he almost comes off as untouchable in that for whoever tries to get in his way, he can simply arrest them or sentence them to death. Still, to this spoiled prince's credit, he was clever enough to usurp the throne from his brother King Richard with the help of his hypnotizing assistant Sir Hiss. He rules using a fun mix of fear and taxes, driving his citizens into a state of poverty and despair. However, John himself is quite a bit of a coward with a hair-trigger temper. He's constantly outwitted by Robin Hood, and while Robin Hood may be one of the few people who are able to constantly and successfully trick him, John's still got a whole army of soldiers at his side that can't be underestimated. Although not a complete dummy, whenever this prince is on his lonesome and without his guards or his hench Snake, he always shows just how easy it is to disarm him. He may be a royal, but his personal power is somewhat lacking. So if you need a villain who's just a bit more impressive, how about the world's greatest criminal mind? Or you can just call him Professor Ratigan for short. Distinguished with a not-so-hidden temper, this Vincent Price-voiced rat has many different sides to him. On the one hand, he's Basil's intellectual equal, actually being able to stay one step ahead of him for most of the film, and even breaking the detective's spirit at one point. Additionally, while the robot queen idea was a bit goofy, you can't deny how successful it nearly was in giving Ratigan a position of power in mouse society. It's also implied that he's been able to avoid being arrested on several occasions, getting away with his crimes and further earning himself the title of being Basil's one and only rival. On the other side of things, you have to acknowledge that what truly makes Ratigan scary is that he has both brain and brawn on his side. He's got a whole gang's worth of mice and other creatures who are loyal to him, not to mention a cat that he's able to use as a means to keep others in line. He even nearly feeds the queen herself to his dear Felicia, but even when left without any backup, when pushed into a corner, Ratigan completely pushes aside his distinguished side and relies fully on his rat strength, his impressive speed, and his incredibly sharp claws. In all honesty, out of all of our villains so far, Ratigan came the closest to winning. The only thing we can really knock him for is just leaving Basil and Dawson in a death trap, giving them the opportunity to escape instead of just killing them himself.
Oh, this is wicked.
So maybe he's just a bit egotistical to the point of it being detrimental. It's also shown that Basil is just a bit more clever than him, especially when Ratigan himself becomes blinded with rage. Still, these couple mistakes don't take away from just how powerful this brilliant and devious rat manages to be. Although, if you want a villain who seems to get away with his crimes scot-free, look no further than the Coachman from Pinocchio. This guy. Oof. Possibly one of the darkest villains in the Disney canon, the Coachman is known for using his seemingly endless supply of resources, namely his own private island that's filled with games, cigars, and beer, to trick naughty little boys into literally making jackasses of themselves. From there, he's able to further finance his efforts by using these new donkeys as labor in his salt mines or as products he can sell on the black market.
And what might your name be?
Truly the stuff of nightmares, especially given that he got away with it for so long. It's the Coachman's wealth and sneakiness, only allowing rumors of his pleasure island to spread to children, that make him so damn scary. So why can't we put him any higher? Well, as successful as the Coachman is, his power can still be taken away in the right circumstances. For example, if a certain former puppet boy and his father decided to call the cops after they finished celebrating, because he's not a royal like Prince John, we feel that there's no way the Coachman would be able to get away with all his crimes once someone actually manages to squeal on him. Additionally, while his face is certainly intimidating and he knows how to use a whip, he isn't much of a physical force either, which is probably why he had to go after gullible little kids who, even if they weren't turned into donkeys, would still be too small to stand up to him. Another villain who works best from the shadows, and who's just as skilled at it, if not more so, is Mother Gothel. Gothel's only desire is to remain young and essentially immortal, and she's willing to do whatever it takes to keep hold of her magic flower, from kidnapping all the way to straight up murder.
Now look what you've done, Rapunzel.
Gothel is one of the sneakiest villains we've discussed so far, being able to get away with her crime for well over a decade thanks to her careful planning and hiding. While it could be argued that her unwillingness to humor her so-called daughter when it came to the floating lights is what led to her demise, Gothel is still a master manipulator and gaslighter. Gothel's also a great tracker, being able to find and follow Rapunzel and Eugene fairly easily while also simply being a lot stronger than she looks, arming herself with knives and other weapons. This, combined with her skills at sneakiness, allow her to take out stronger enemies like the Stabbington brothers, as well as Eugene when he tries to rescue Rapunzel. Gothel's also willing to compromise and let Rapunzel save Eugene in order order to assure a promise that Rapunzel would never try to escape, once again showing her ability to plan ahead for the sake of her goals. Really, the only mistake Gothel makes is underestimating Eugene's love and willingness to die for his true love. Getting back to the Disney villain royals, it's time to bow down to the Queen of Hearts. Much like with Prince John, it's the Queen's royal status that gets her this far. Though, that's not to say she should be totally underestimated. If anything, she's much more impressive and intimidating than John, even if she is a bit of a blowhard, given that her catchphrase is literally, "Off with the head!"
Off with their heads!
It's safe to say that she's a pretty violent person. As a queen, she's got the power of a royal as well as a full deck of card guards at her disposal, each of them armed with axes. Still, they're just cards with human heads and limbs attached, so not necessarily the most intimidating or undefeatable type of guard out there. As for herself, between her huge temper, her enormous ego, and her childishness that comes out whenever she doesn't get her way, the Queen of Hearts actually manages to come off as more fragile than she looks, both emotionally and mentally. As such, you have to wonder just how well she'd do if she didn't have a means of decapitating anyone and everyone who ever upset her. We've finally arrived at our most recent wicked royal, King Magnifico from Wish. As his name implies, Magnifico has some pretty magnificent magic powers. Namely, he's able to grant wishes. Although, because we only see him grant 2 wishes, it's hard to say if he has any limits when it comes to these wishes. He's able to do other forms of magic, such as levitation and potions, and we later learn that he has access to a book that gives its user dark magic powers. While these powers do corrupt, they also allow for great strength and even stronger spells like magic hands and disguise magic. We should also talk about Magnifico's status as Rosas's beloved king, making it easy for others to believe that everything he does is for their own good. He's also able to twist people's wishes to his own gain, like when he took Simon's wish of being a knight and turned him into a brainwashed servant who was willing to go after his own friends.
Find them so they may pay for their betrayal.
But for as powerful as Magnifico is, you could argue that his paranoia and hunger for power are his biggest weaknesses, given that they lead to him corrupting himself. Additionally, any villain that can be defeated by a group song or by the power of wishes and the community can't be that powerful in comparison to a wishing star. Moving along, we have the first of our hunters, that being Clayton from Tarzan. Self-described survivalist, Clayton's much more than just his hunter persona. Sure, his skills with a shotgun and a machete are fairly impressive, but it's his deviousness that helps him stand out as more than just a cliche. He proves to be a good planner, having the hindsight to hire men who would be perfectly fine with capturing and killing gorillas, and is also shown to be a pretty decent manipulator as well when we see him use Tarzan's affections for Jane against him. He may be a bit on the arrogant side, but he always makes sure to give himself an advantage that's worthy of bragging about. Clayton's sheer strength also can't be ignored, though when it comes to one-on-one fights, he tends to lean more on the cowardly side of things, choosing to use his gun for as long as possible instead of fighting fair. But like many other villains, he ends up being blinded by his temper to the point of accidentally hanging himself when he refuses to listen to Tarzan's warning. Happens every time. Similarly, Rourke from Atlantis: The Lost Empire follows a very similar arc of manipulation and betrayal for the sake of greed. It should be noted that unlike Clayton and another certain hunter who we'll be talking about very soon, Rourke actually has some concrete status, being an army commander as well as a mercenary.
I prefer the term adventure capitalist.
This gives him more of an air of authority than if he were simply a brute, leading the other characters to continuing to trust him up until it's almost too late. He also proves to be more competent than other leaders on this list, like Governor Radcliffe. Further adding to Rourke's fame is his talent for leading expeditions, as well as his skills with a variety of weapons such as guns, knives, and axes. He's also a total manipulator, being incredibly analytical as well as being able to still scheme while under pressure, add in a willingness to play dirty, and disregard emotional baggage thanks to his pragmatic attitude, and it's no surprise that Rourke was able to get so far in his career. Now, while Clayton and Rourke may have been pretty good villains, we'd say that Gaston still outshines them in terms of power. It could be argued that Clayton is slightly smarter than Gaston, but as someone who can take down multiple grown men and lift a bench with 3 women on it using only one hand, there's no denying who's stronger. Gaston is also skilled with his gun as well as a variety of melee weapons such as clubs or arrows. He can be a bit cowardly and also isn't afraid to be a dirty fighter, but you can't deny that the man gets results. What truly gives Gaston the advantage, however, is the power he has over the townspeople. Anyone can have power over people that they literally hired for a job, but Gaston? Thanks to his outward shows of charm and strength, all it takes is a few words of authority for him to get a full-on mob of people by his side.
I say we kill the beast!
In a sense, Gaston is the peak version of Hans, relying on looks, shows of strength and competence, and his reputation to essentially get all the respect and power he needs to effortlessly rule over others. And Gaston does all this without an actual crown or even a title to his infamous name, just muscles and handsomeness. Additionally, when it comes to people like Belle who aren't simply won over by his charm, Gaston still has ways of manipulating them. Remember, if not for getting distracted by the beast, Gaston would have likely gone away with sending Maurice to an asylum. The townspeople likely still seeing him as being in the right for it. Sure, he may not be able to take on the Beast when Beast is actually fighting back, but one failure certainly doesn't take away from all his successes. From firearms wielders to fantastical magic, Madame Mim manages to be silly yet skilled in her transformation abilities. An old rival of Merlin himself, Mim is a dark magic user who manages to be skilled in a variety of transformations, giving herself the ability to turn into any form or beast she needs, including dragon. She's incredibly durable, with her skull being able to withstand being crushed with a giant rock, and she can also teleport and fly on her broomstick, giving her the ability for a quick escape if she ever needs one. Her durability? It can't be understated that even if she's not the most powerful witch out there, her powers are still strong enough to allow her to go toe-to-toe with Merlin, with her willingness to cheat also giving her an advantage. But as limitless as this magic may seem, ironically enough, it's Mim's overconfidence that causes her to lose in the end. Additionally, it's implied that Merlin's magic is more inherently powerful because it's good instead of evil. This is demonstrated with his most powerful move, that being his transformation into a germ that makes Mim sick for several weeks. So much for the power of evil, huh? In that sense, perhaps transformation potions are more effective, or at least that seems to be Yzma's mindset. Being the advisor to the throne for several decades, Yzma is respected by the people of the kingdom, being seen as more competent and easier to deal with than Kuzco despite her cruelty towards peasants. When Kuzco seemingly dies, it's incredibly easy for her to take over the kingdom, with the palace guards showing their loyalty to the point of sacrificing their lives for her in the attempts to capture Kuzco and Pacha.
Hey, I've been turned into a cow. Can I go home?
Speaking of Yzma's hired help, you can't forget about Kronk. Though given his eventual attempt at betrayal and overall incompetence, it's hard to say whether he's more of an advantage or a hindrance for her. What is a true advantage within her arsenal, however, is Yzma's collection of potions and poisons. Whether or not she uses them effectively is a different argument entirely, but on their own, there's still a strong enough source of power to give Yzma a fighting chance, even if she doesn't have much of a physical advantage. Add in her chaotic cleverness and absolutely insane durability for a woman of her age and build, and you've got yourself a pretty powerful and certainly memorable baddie. From someone who uses potions to a guy who truly knows how to use stolen tech. Next is Robert Callahan, aka Yokai. Okay, so he's not as fun nor as cool as Yzma, according to some, being a very typical story of someone who could have had a pretty alright life if not for getting blinded by revenge. And that was his mistake! Memes aside, it can't be denied that Callahan is very intelligent, coming up with a pretty flawless plan when it came to stealing Hiro's microbots and using them in an incredibly effective way. With his new heartless persona comes a willingness to do whatever he needs to in order to succeed in his revenge scheme, and we see Yokai use his microbots in different ways, knowing exactly how to capture each of Hiro's teammates, albeit temporarily. But in all honesty, as powerful as the microbots are, Callahan's biggest strength is also his biggest weakness. Once a certain amount of microbots are destroyed or lost, we see Callahan left without any sort of defense, leading to a very easy defeat. Really, you'd think a guy as seemingly smart as him would have caught on to Hiro's final plan a little more quickly. But for those who want a more traditional example of being a one-man, or rather one-woman army, look no further than Namari from Raya and the Last Dragon. Now, yes, we know Namari had a redemption of sorts, and technically isn't a villain. However, she played enough of an antagonist role that we feel she counts for this ranking. First thing to account for is her status as the princess of Kumandra's Fang, which is one of the more powerful kingdoms in the land. As princess, she has access to her kingdom's soldiers, which she uses in her travels to find and capture Raya. Unlike most other villains, Namari doesn't rule by fear, and is instead loved by her citizens, especially the kingdom's children, further solidifying her power as a royal. Fang is also known for its giant cats, which Namari also knows how to use. As for her own strengths, Namari is an incredibly skilled fighter, being skilled in weapons such as dual swords and crossbows. She's also shown to be fairly brilliant and calculating, making her the complete rival package for Raya and her crew. If not for the fact that she becomes a hero by the end of the film, being forced to work with Raya and the others to help save the world, Namari might have had a top spot on our list. But why be clever or intimidating when you can straight up just break the rules, as demonstrated by King Candy, aka Turbo. Often seen as the best of the modern Disney twist villains, it's really not hard to see why. Really, the fact that Turbo had the skills and talents to hack into another game and essentially give himself a free pass to do whatever he wanted is the most impressive thing about him. With just a bit of hacking, Turbo gives himself unquestioned authority and loyalty from his brainwashed subjects. But even outside of Sugar Rush's main code, Turbo has plenty of his own skills. Even if he's a bit on the short side, the guy's a master driver and knows how to fight to his advantage. He's an incredibly cunning manipulator, able to get Ralph temporarily on his side fairly easily, and as for his Cybug form, well, just look at it.
Get back here, little guy!
if not for a very explosive death, it's reasonable to think that Turbo could have very well taken over the entire arcade. But hey, every video game boss has got to have their weak point. Sticking with our tech-based villains, it's finally time to rank Doris from Meet the Robinsons. Yes, some of you have noted that she was missing from our previous ranking, and as it turns out, she's a bit more powerful than we once thought. Though she may look like a harmless bowler hat, Doris is armed with sharp mechanical arms and killer blades. She's able to take over the mind of anyone who wears her, even animals and dinosaurs, and even when she's not outright controlling people, her relationship with the adult Goob shows how cunning she can be at manipulation.
Together, we made the perfect team.
What puts her this high up is the sheer fact that in an alternate timeline where she had the ability to make more of herself, she was able to take over the world and turn all of humanity into her puppets. However, much like with someone like Callahan, Doris's one big weakness sort of overshadows all of her strengths. She may have the ability to take over the world, but she still needs to actually be worn by someone in a position of power first, thus giving her the means to manufacture a whole line of Doris hats and get enough humans to wear them before enacting her grand plan. While she can still defend herself in instances of danger, her goals of taking over the world are so heavily dependent on others that we're unable to place her any higher. Sci-fi villains really are out of this world, and Captain Gantu manages to be a pretty impressive force all on his own. Ignoring his eventual discharge, Gantu's position as captain of the Galactic Federation granted him much respect and authority. He's incredibly brutish, and while his lack of being a brilliant strategist or manipulator may be seen as a fault, it's undeniable that Gantu's true power lies in his sheer size and strength. All we can say is that it's a good thing Stitch is indestructible. Otherwise, their fight could have gotten messy. It's also worth noting that Gantu is a skilled pilot and can effectively use both plasma blasters and net cannons. Honestly, the guy's only real weakness is that he can be a bit arrogant and impulsive, although not nearly to the point of it being outright destructive or detrimental like with other villains we've talked about. Keeping with the alien theme for now, Treasure Planet's Scroop may not be a giant shark man, but he's still just as intimidating as one, perhaps even more so. Unlike Silver, who has a more subtle evil side to him and thus doesn't care for unnecessary bloodshed, Scroop is shown to never hesitate when it comes to taking out those who stand in his way, whether that be innocent bystanders like Mr. Arrow or his own captain. In addition to being incredibly sneaky as well as a great liar, Scroop's alien abilities allow him to climb on the walls and ceiling of any area, giving him an aerial advantage in a fight. He's also shown being stealthy, strong, and an overall skilled fighter. He's still able to be tricked by Jim in the end, but Scroop still had him on the ropes for a good long while and likely would have won the fight at several points if not for the interference of Morph and a bit of extra luck on Jim's side. Okay, now we're getting into the big leagues, and who better to start us off than Judge Frollo. Frollo serves as a powerful Parisian justice minister, using his position of power as a means to purge whom he considers to be sinners, namely the Romani people, like Esmeralda. Although he's only a judge, he's still able to sentence people to imprisonment and death without much argument, as well as command soldiers to do his bidding as if he were a king, further adding to his authority.
The sentence for insubordination is death.
Although not physically powerful, he's still strong enough to kill Quasimodo's mother as well as restrain Esmeralda, and we also see him use daggers and swords to try and slay people with his own hands. Speaking of Quasimodo, Frollo's level of manipulation and gaslighting when it comes to his surrogate parenting overshadows even that of Mother Gothel's, and even when Quasi tries to fight back against him, Frollo still uses Quasi as a means to find the Court of Miracles. Really, his only weaknesses are that he has no authority inside the church, although even this falls by the wayside by the film's climax, and that Quasi is physically stronger than him, even if it takes a while for Frollo to truly understand this. For our next ranking, we have Disney's most notable big cat buddies, those being Shere Khan and Scar. In terms of power, these two are incredibly similar. They're both big cats who have claws and fangs, but still tend to rely more on their talents for manipulation and intimidation in their attempts to gain power. Shere Khan is also seen as the most vicious predator in the jungle, seemingly having more physical strength than Scar. However, Scar does have his own army of hyenas who, outside of the film's final confrontation, manage to remain loyal to him in spite of his cruelty. Ultimately, both Scar and Shere Khan have their own fears, with Scar fearing Mufasa, hence why he had to trick his brother and catch him at a moment of weakness in order to have a chance at killing him, and Shere Khan fearing fire. We feel that in terms of power, they both have fairly equal footing with each other, being skilled and intimidating in their own unique yet still similar ways. Managing to be even more wicked than these cats is the one and only Evil Queen. As her quote-unquote name implies, the Evil Queen is a powerful monarch, though outside of her magic mirror and a lone huntsman, we don't exactly see many instances of her commanding others. Perhaps that's why her own powers remained so noteworthy over the years. As a magic user, the Queen's able to disguise herself as an old hag, prompting Snow White to let her guard down. We also can't forget her infamous poison apples, with their only cure being true love's kiss. While this is ultimately another case of a Disney villain getting a bit of a power boost from their status, even if we don't really see much of her ruling her kingdom, the Evil Queen's tenacity and cursed abilities allow her to be a force to be reckoned with. It's too bad her jealousy and a fall off a cliff were still enough to do her in. But while the evil queen may have been seeking adoration, it's safe to say that Dr. Facilier did his best work from the shadows. While it would have been easy to simply claim that Dr. Facilier was only powerful because of his connections to his friends from the other side, it's made clear that Facilier is incredibly powerful in his own right, and what's more, he knows how to use these powers effectively. Being a master in voodoo, he's able to cast spells, create illusions, and control shadows and darkness in order to give himself his own little army to do his bidding.
Now we're cooking. We're gonna find ourselves a frog.
Keep in mind, these shadows themselves are also pretty powerful, only being stopped by powerful sources of light, like Mama Odie's magic or Ray's light. But much like other villains, Dr. Facilier's most powerful ability is his talent for manipulation. While it didn't work on Tiana, he was still able to trick and manipulate Lawrence and Naveen. Unfortunately, all this power couldn't save him when he was unable to repay his debt, so while he may have been a voodoo master, he was still just a mortal in the end. From the bayou to the sea, next up we have Ursula. Like Facilier, Ursula's prime source of power comes from her magic, namely her potions and her curses, as well as her unbreakable deals. While it may take a bit more effort and time, some of these spells are nearly as powerful as the ones from Triton's trident, namely the ones that involve transformation. Speaking of which, once she gets her hands on that trident, she shows her true potential as a sorceress of the sea. But while this may be a temporary power-up, what isn't temporary are Ursula's own physical attributes that allow her to still be a force to be reckoned with, even without her magic. This includes her large physique, her many strong tentacles, and her pair of electric eels. Add in the fact that Ursula is able to easily spy on others, allowing her to stay one step ahead, and it's really no wonder why Triton considered Ursula to be such a threat. While maybe not as powerful as we once thought, the Horned King still manages to be a pretty notable threat within the Disney canon. Yet another spellcaster, the Horned King is a pretty notable one, even if the movie he's from is often forgotten by most people. Included in his array of powerful magical abilities is the ability to control an army of deathless warriors, as well as the ability to use the Black Cauldron, which can revive the dead.
Arise, my messengers of death.
We can't deny that these are some pretty powerful abilities, ones that could easily be a permanent game changer in a fight when used right. We also briefly see him teleport 1 or 2 times. He's also fairly strong as we see him fight Taran in the film's climax. However, given that the Horned King is essentially just a corpse, he ends up not being very durable and is torn apart by his own Black Cauldron.
He's gone. He's gone.
It may be his own source of power, which in itself is a notable weakness, as we don't know how powerful he is without it, but the fact that he himself can't resist its destructive power is a sign that maybe the Horned King is weaker than we initially thought. We've finally come to the last of our purely human villains, and there's no one better to top this category than Mulan's Shan Yu. Sure, Shan Yu may not have supernatural magic nor technology by his side, but he's one heck of a soldier. As the leader of the Huns, Shan Yu at one point had hundreds, perhaps even thousands of soldiers who were completely and utterly loyal to him and their cause, no matter what. Both Shan Yu and his men are incredibly skilled, being armed with swords, knives, bows, and more. Shan Yu also has a trusty falcon that helps him track and spy on enemies, and he himself is almost unnaturally strong, being able to break through wooden roofs and tip over large pillars like they're nothing. Shan Yu is also a great strategist, as we see when he and his men are able to sneak into the parade with their dragon disguise. But what really impressed us is just Shan Yu's sheer durability. The guy, and even a few of his soldiers, were able to survive getting buried under several feet of snow. Certainly nothing to sneeze at, given how fatal that avalanche was for everyone else. Too bad Shan Yu wasn't also fireworks proof. Entering our top 5, let's talk about the second most famous crab in Disney history, Tamatoa. We've got to hand it to this guy. He's certainly made the most of his limited screen time. Thanks to his monstrous size, Tamatoa is seen as pretty undefeatable by most mortals.
That's my grandma.
That's my grandma. I ate my grandma.
Even a demigod like Maui struggles to defeat him when he's without the transformation powers of his magic hook. Simply put, this guy's all about style and strength, with his hard gold-covered shell being just as tough and dangerous as his huge claws. If someone tries to fight him without any sort of backup plan or powerful weapon, there's no doubt they're likely going to be crushed. However, Tamatoa is very easy to trick, as we see Moana do twice, and what's more, his giant size actually ends up being a detriment when Moana figures out a way to knock him off his feet.
Hey! Did you like the song?
But hey, at least his song was catchy. Moving on, we have the most infamous royal advisor in the animated world, Jafar. A wicked sorcerer and vizier, Jafar is all about gaining as much power as possible. As a seer, he's able to spy on others and locate other sources of power, such as the magic lamp. Jafar is also able to hypnotize people using his magic staff, assuring that anyone who didn't already respect him would still bow to his authority. But of course, Jafar's main power comes from his wishes, which eventually turn him into an all-powerful genie. Obviously, being a genie has one big weakness, but as we saw in The Return of Jafar, even when he's being forced to serve a master, Jafar has quite a bit of wiggle room regarding his powers and how he's able to use them against his enemies. But even when he's in a situation where he's seemingly rendered powerless, Jafar's sneakiness and overall cleverness still managed to keep him a step ahead of most people, even if a certain street rat was still able to trick him in the end. Honestly, there's a reason why he seems to be the de facto leader when it comes to Disney villain stuff. Well, him and one other certain villainess. We've now come to the true representatives of evil, starting with the wicked mistress herself, Maleficent. Being our final true spellcaster of the lot, Maleficent primarily uses dark magic, curses, and shapeshifting to give herself an advantage over other fairies and magic users in the kingdom. She literally describes her power set as all the powers of hell, and with how cruel she is, we never see her hold back regarding her powers. She can create huge thorn forests that are nearly impossible to get through, and Merryweather implies that Maleficent is able to control the weather and create forces like deadly frost storms. Even trickery seems to be worthless against her, given how even after the good fairies tried their best to protect Aurora, Maleficent was still able to lure her to a spinning wheel. Though she comes off as an unstoppable force in her own right, she's still got plenty of backup thanks to her pig soldiers and her loyal raven Diablo. Finally, you simply can't forget about her deadly dragon form with its bright green flames that are hot enough to melt bricks. Looking at all of this, it almost feels like a cop-out that she's able to be defeated by a purified, enchanted sword, but if she truly is the embodiment of evil, then we suppose if she had to be defeated by only one thing, it would make sense for it to be concentrated goodness. Getting our silver medal of power, we have Fantasia's Chernobog. Now, considering this is a bit of a shakeup from last time, we're sure some of you are confused, but just hear us out. Though not much of a character in his own right, Chernobog is seen as both Satan and as a raw embodiment of evil, being more a force of nature than anything else. He's able to summon spirits, demons, and fire, although we don't actually see him do anything with these things, only really summoning them because it's just what he does. Heck, he even throws his own minions and demons into the fires of Bald Mountain for fun, so it's not as though he's summoning an army for any specific reason. What's more, while it's implied that Chernobog is immortal due to being, Satan, he still cowers at things like sunlight and church hymns. If those are his weaknesses, can he really be all-powerful? In all honesty, Chernobog's power seems to rely on the audience's interpretation of him more than anything else. And for us, there's one other immortal character in the Disney canon who manages to pose much more of a threat. Finally, our gold medal of power goes to Hades, Lord of the Dead.
Name is Hades, Lord of the Dead. Hi, how you doing?
Yes, we're going with Hades this time around, as he is a literal god. Like any god, he has a wide variety of supernatural abilities, from magic and hellfire to having the ability to make unbreakable deals. Although he can still be hurt or temporarily imprisoned, Hades is still immortal as well as highly durable, and thus can never truly be defeated. He knows how to work from the shadows and was incredibly close to changing his destiny, even if his two henchmen and Meg ultimately got in the way. Described as a sort of fast-talking car salesman, Hades knows how to think on his feet in spite of his fiery temper, which he actually has pretty decent control over, while also having the abilities to put any plan he needs to into action. Speaking of those abilities, the fact that he seems to be the only one able to completely control the Titans, those huge, nearly unstoppable forces of nature, speaks to just how powerful Hades can be when given the opportunity. For all these reasons, we feel that Hades just needs to be on top this time around. But hey, maybe we'll change our mind later on, or maybe a future Disney villain will actually be able to top him. For now though, there's no one more powerful in the Disney canon, in our opinion, than Hades.